You can't be serious. My mother's voice, usually a thin veil of civility over a bedrock of resentment, cracked with something I hadn't heard in years, genuine disbelief. It was a sound I'd been anticipating, a small, dark spark I'd nurtured in the quiet corners of my mind for months. "Oh, I'm quite serious, Mother," I replied, my voice carefully neutral, a stark contrast to the tremor in hers. The late afternoon sun, buttery and lazy, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the house. Or rather, the house that had been mine, that I'd poured every ounce of my savings and future into, only to have it become a pawn in their elaborate game. Life hadn't always been this way. There was a time, a distant, hazy epoch, when the house hummed with a different kind of energy. It was filled with the scent of my mother's perpetually burning potpourri, the muffled arguments of my parents in the next room, and the quiet thrum of my father's discontent. I was the dutiful daughter, the one who never caused trouble, the one who always did what was expected. I lived in a perpetual state of polite obligation, walking on eggshells in my own home. My parents, bless their hearts, believed in a certain kind of inheritance, not of wealth, but of duty. I was to be the responsible one, the one who looked after them, who smoothed over their rough edges. As I grew older, this duty morphed into something more suffocating. They never outright demanded anything, not really. It was a subtle erosion, a constant drip of expectation that wore away at my own nascent desires. When my father passed, it wasn't a moment of grief so much as a shift in the power dynamics. Suddenly, my mother was alone, and she leaned on me. Hard. Every problem, every inconvenience, every slight perceived or real, was presented to me as a crisis that only I, her ever-reliable daughter, could solve. She developed a peculiar talent for turning molehills into mountains, and I was the designated Sherpa. Then came my own child, a whirlwind of joy and exhaustion. A daughter. My daughter. Suddenly, the weight of my mother's needs felt unbearable, a crushing force against the fragile joy of new motherhood. My husband and I were struggling, finances stretched thin. We needed stability. We needed space. And then, the opportunity arose. My parents, seeing their own financial situation shift with my father's passing and their own dwindling savings, had an idea. An idea that, at the time, felt like a lifeline. They would rent out their own house, the one they'd lived in for decades, and move in with me. To help us, they said. To be closer to their grandchild. It was a Faustian bargain, though I didn't see it then. They moved into our modest apartment, and I, in my infinite, misguided generosity, agreed to manage their rental property. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, a way to ease the financial strain on all sides. I found tenants, handled repairs, collected rent. It was a lot, on top of a newborn and a demanding, suddenly dependent mother under my roof. But I did it. I always did it. The red flags were there, fluttering gently at first, then becoming more insistent. My mother's constant, subtle criticisms of my parenting, my housekeeping, my life choices. Her veiled comments about how much easier things would be if we're more like. Her uncanny ability to twist any compliment I received into a veiled insult. I remember one evening, a few months after they'd moved in, when my daughter was only a few months old. I was exhausted, my hair in a messy bun, stained t-shirt, just trying to get through the day. My mother, impeccably dressed, surveyed the room with a look of distaste. "You know," she'd said, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness, "if you just put in a little more effort, you could make this place look like something. It's a shame for little to grow up in such disarray." The implication hung heavy in the air, that my exhaustion, my focus on my child, was a personal failing. That I was somehow letting everyone down. Then there was the way she'd started referring to the rental income. Not as their money, but as a collective resource. "We'll use some of that rental money to fix the roof," she'd announce, or, I was thinking, with the rental money coming in, we could finally afford that trip to the coast. It was never, your money, or, my money, but a nebulous, our money, implying a shared ownership that hadn't been agreed upon. I swallowed my unease, telling myself it was just her way of speaking, her habit of including everyone. The true turning point, the moment the whispers of unease solidified into a chilling certainty, came with the house. House. The one I'd bought with my husband, the one I'd envisioned raising my daughter in, the one that represented our stability, our future. We'd been struggling, as I mentioned. Bills piled up, unexpected expenses arose. We needed breathing room. My husband suggested selling our house, MOV. ING into something smaller, and using the equity to get back on our feet, perhaps even invest in something more stable. It was a painful prospect, a symbol of failure, but a practical necessity. We discussed it at length. We decided, with heavy hearts, to list the house. We agreed that we would move in temporarily with my mother and stepfather. It was a sacrifice, but it felt like the responsible thing to do, the only way to secure our future. We informed my mother of our plans, explaining the financial necessity. She'd seemed understanding, even supportive. "Of course, dear," she'd said, patting my hand. "Family is what matters. We'll make it work." The week we were supposed to finalize the sale, the week we were packing our belongings, the week my daughter was excitedly talking about sleeping in Grandma's house, my mother called me, her voice bright, almost chirpy. "Just wanted to let you know," she began, "that your stepfather and I have been doing some thinking. We've decided to make a change. We're going to move back into house." I froze. "Back into your house?" "But, we're selling our house. We were planning on moving in with you." A pause. Then, the sound that would forever echo in my memory, a sound of pure, unadulterated smugness. "Oh, darling," she'd said, the sweetness dripping from her words like poison. "We've decided we're not renting it out anymore. We need it. For ourselves." The world tilted. "But, Mother, we have nowhere to go. We were relying on you." My voice, despite my best efforts, was a thin thread of desperation. Another pause, longer this time. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. Then, with a chilling finality, she delivered the blow. "Well, you should have thought of that, shouldn't you? We're moving back. And you, my dear, can figure something out. We're not going to let our little nest egg sit empty." And then, the words that still made my blood run cold, "Actually, we've already made arrangements. We're moving back in this weekend. We'll need you to be out of the apartment by then, of course. And as for the house sale, well, you always were a bit too eager to unload it. Perhaps if you hadn't been so hasty, things would have worked out differently for you." She hung up. The phone clattered back into its cradle. I stood in the middle of our living room, surrounded by boxes, my daughter's innocent babble a distant echo from her room. Homeless. That was the word that slammed into me. My daughter and I, homeless, because my parents had decided they wanted their rental property back, their financial security paramount, their own child and grandchild cast aside like inconvenient baggage. The betrayal was a physical ache, a cold hand squeezing my chest. But beneath the shock, a different emotion began to stir. Not anger, not precisely. It was colder, sharper. A grim, quiet resolve. They had underestimated me. They had always underestimated me, seeing me as their obedient little pawn, incapable of independent thought or action. They thought I would crumble, beg, accept my fate. They were wrong. My mother's smugness, her casual dismissal of our entire existence, was a clear invitation. An invitation to play their game, but on my terms. I spent the next few days in a daze, packing, making frantic calls to friends and distant relatives, trying to cobble together a temporary solution. The sale of our house had fallen through. We were adrift. My daughter, bless her heart, seemed oblivious to the seismic shift in our lives, her world still contained within the familiar walls of our apartment. My mother, meanwhile, was radiating a false sense of triumphant relief. She sent me texts, full of faux concern. "Are you managing all right, darling? Let me know if you need anything." Each message was a tiny jab, a reminder of their power, their control. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I remembered the rental agreement. The one I'd meticulously drafted, the one I'd had them sign, with all its clauses and stipulations. It was a standard lease, but I'd added a few specific addendums, clauses I'd felt were prudent at the time, a small hedge against future misunderstandings. I'd spent hours poring over legal templates, ensuring everything was ironclad. My mother, in her haste to get the tenants in and the money flowing, had barely glanced at it. The house. The one they were now moving back into. The one I had signed over the deed to, in my naive trust, as collateral for the loan I'd taken out to help them establish themselves financially after my father's passing. It was a loan I'd been diligently repaying, a loan that was almost entirely paid off, with the final few payments due that month. I made a phone call. Not to my parents, but to the lawyer who had handled the initial sale of my house. I explained the situation, my voice calm and measured. I asked him to review the paperwork, specifically the clauses related to the rental agreement for house, the one they were now occupying. I asked him to review the terms of the loan I'd taken out, the one secured by my house. The next morning, the house was still a mess of boxes. My daughter was watching cartoons, her small body curled on the sofa. My mother, predictably, was in the kitchen, loudly preparing breakfast. The air was thick with the unspoken tension. She'd made sure to mention, the night before, how glad she was that we had somewhere to go, implying that she had done us a great favor by kicking us out of the apartment immediately. Then, my phone rang. It was the lawyer. He'd reviewed the documents. And he had good news. I walked into the living room, where my mother was now attempting to engage me in conversation about the impending sale of my house. "Such a shame, darling," she was saying, her voice laced with mock sympathy. "But perhaps it's for the best. Sometimes, you have to make sacrifices." I held up my phone. On the screen was an email. A confirmation. I'd executed the final payment on the loan that same morning, digitally, from my phone, without fanfare. The loan was paid in full. The collateral, my house, was now entirely free and clear. "Mother," I said, my voice quiet, carrying a weight that made her pause. "You said I should have thought of things earlier. That I was too hasty in selling my house." She blinked. "Well, yes. What about it?" "It turns out," I continued, my gaze steady, "that the house you're so pleased to be moving back into, it's not yours anymore." Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "You signed it over to me as security for the loan." "Yes," I confirmed. "And I just paid off the final installment of that loan this morning. The deed is now solely in my name." "And the lease agreement I had you both sign for your current residence?" "The one where you agreed to pay market rent, with a substantial penalty clause for early termination or breach of contract?" I let the words hang in the air. "You've both breached it. By moving yourselves back into my house, you've effectively abandoned this property. And according to the lease, that means you owe me 6 months' rent, in advance. Plus penalties." The color drained from her face. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. You can't do that," she stammered, her voice rising. "This is our home." "No, Mother," I said, my voice still calm, but now with an edge of steel. "This is my apartment. And the house you're so happy to be in? That's my house. And as for you two, you're now effectively tenants of mine, in this apartment, until you can pay me the quite substantial sum you owe me. Or you can leave. Immediately." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. My stepfather appeared in the doorway, his face etched with confusion. I didn't need to explain to him. My mother's reaction told him everything he needed to know. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls from my mother, weeping, raging, pleading. She tried to rally my aunt, my uncle, anyone who would listen to her side of the story. They'd always been her allies, her flying monkeys. But this time, it was different. The story, when filtered through the cold, hard facts, didn't sound quite so sympathetic. They'd been the ones renting out house, forcing me and my daughter into homelessness, only to reclaim it themselves. And now, they were effectively my tenants, owing me a fortune for a place they'd abandoned. My aunt, usually so quick to condemn me, paused. So, they're living in your house and you want them to pay you rent? Seems fair, if that's what the contract says. My uncle, ever the pragmatist, simply said, if you've got them legally, sonny, go for it. My mother's appeals fell on deaf ears. The smugness had backfired spectacularly. They'd played their game of entitlement and expected me to fold. Instead, I'd meticulously gathered the pieces of their deception and used them to dismantle their entire foundation. They couldn't pay. They had no assets. Their rental income, the very thing they'd coveted so fiercely, was now their downfall. My mother's carefully cultivated image of the benevolent, if slightly eccentric, matriarch crumbled. She was exposed for what she was, a selfish, manipulative woman who prioritized her own comfort and financial gain over her family. Within a week, they were out of the apartment. They found a tiny, cramped studio across town, a stark contrast to the spacious comfort they'd enjoyed in my apartment, and even more so to the house they'd reclaimed, only to lose possession of it. My daughter and I moved back into our house. It was still filled with boxes, still bore the scars of our sudden displacement, but it was ours. It was safe. I never received the rent money they owed me. The legal process of eviction and collection would have been costly and time-consuming. I was content with the quiet satisfaction of watching their carefully constructed world fall apart. They had their house, but it was no longer their sanctuary. It was a constant, silent reminder of their greed, their arrogance, and their profound failure as parents. They had taken everything from us, and in return, I had taken their peace, their comfort, and their illusion of control. The silence that followed their departure was a balm, a chilling testament to the quiet justice of it all. No lectures, no grand pronouncements. Just the quiet, steady hum of a life reclaimed.